All right, so we're going to continue Hilchas Melichas and Samach Tes. Just a quick review of Sif Tezayin, then we're going to do Zayin and Ches. We're talking now about the Kli itself. The Melicha is done either on a surface that is slanted, we said, where the blood can drain, or in a Kli, ideally, that has nekovim, that is perforated, so the blood can ooze out. Otherwise, it would be a big problem for the Basar and for the Kli, actually, to be immersed in tzir, in dam, for an extended period of time. It affects the Kli, and it affects the Basar. And the Mechaber divided up the halachas between Tezayin, Yudayin, and Ches as far as what happens to the Kli and what happens to the Basar that was nimlach, salted, in a non-perforated Kli. Because that would cause a tremendous problem. In other words, there are issues in Melicha where we can deal with b'di'eved, efsid meruba. In other words, even though it may not be possible to do Melicha anymore, you can still do tzli perhaps. So there are leniences in various situations. This one is not so simple. So it's important to keep in mind that obviously Melicha, as important as it is, needs to be done properly. It's not just enough to salt it, as we said last time. It has to be salted for a good amount of time, and it has to be on slant in order for us to be able to cook this piece, choose to cook it. So in Sif Tezayin, we spoke about the problem of not having salted in the Kli Menukav, that it's also lishtamish boisu Kli b'davar roteach. The source of that is from the Gemara, that's the only proper way to do Melicha is in the Menukav. And therefore, if somebody did Melicha in a Kli she'eino Menukav, that Kli becomes Asur. Now, we already learned in Taaruvot that this is not, even though Meliach Kiroteach, it does definitely have heat. It does Asur the Kli, but it does not Asur the Kli like Bishul. Obviously, it does not penetrate so far. It only penetrates Kedei Klipa. That's important to know, because if you were ever to cook in it later on, you would only have to consider the Klipa, in which you happen to know the amount. Sometimes we don't know the amount of the Isser, and we always calculate against the whole Keli. Here we know that the maximum would be a Klipa. Now the question, of course, would be, how much of the Keli? All right, but if the piece of meat is occupying the whole Keli, obviously it could be that it spreads everywhere. It all depends on the circumstances. But that's as far as it goes. And the majority of the poskim pretty much say that that's what we're dealing over here, that it's only bolek a klipa. Now, we did distinguish, however, that there are some poskim who are stricter, in the sense that even though it was not an 80-minute or half an hour melicha, in other words, the time that has elapsed for this melicha in this kli that was not menukov was just a short time, was just a few minutes. Some are stricter, and some are even, that this would qualify it as though it was nimlach for the whole time. As long as it was nimlach a little bit, that's it. And even if it was not completely, some say even if it was not fully salted, covered, from top and bottom and all sides, it would still be a problem. In other words, for the kli so far, the kli would absorb a klipa. We don't see that from the mechaber. The mechaber was not machmer unless it was kashir melicha.
Are we saying the kli does not absorb? There has to be some shot.
Well, if the question was, what would be the din if it sat in this pot, in this vessel, but only for about 10-15 minutes, not enough time to do a real melicha.
It has some melicha there.
Well, there's two. When we say some, we mean two things. Either some time, it was done for 10 minutes as opposed to 8 minutes, a half an hour, or some salt. In other words, put some salt around it. Some say like you would put for sli, where the custom is to put some salt. So it's not a real melicha, but it's enough, according to some poskim, to render this kli asur, at least if you have the two criteria. In other words, you have the full time, plus you had a little bit of salt. Because they say, listen, a little bit of salt does extract some salt, blood, you will have tzir, you will have some absorption.
With no salt left.
No, but just putting a piece in the...
Even if you left it there for that...
No problem, no problem. Because what causes the meliach keroteach is the salt, right? just, sitting in there by itself, hopefully nothing will happen, unless, of course, it's sitting already in accumulation of tzir from before, then, of course, it would depend on how long it was in there, too.
Well, the tzir from before would be ideal.
Exactly. No. What is that?
The tzir from before blood in it was sold.
Exactly.
Without even additional.
Yes, but let's say, it's sitting there, and now the question is regarding the meat sitting in that kind of tzir, even though it has no salt. Right, the vessel, yes, in achinam. The tzir would cause a problem if it's there long enough, plus the meat may be in trouble if it's sitting in this tzir too. So anyway, the Mechaber did not make that differentiation. He's obviously talking about the typical situation where you had the right amount of salt, you had the right amount of time, and then the kli would be also kedei klipa. So we briefly discussed the Shach here asking about the Ramah. That Ramah said, "Im nishtamish bo boy klipo imudover yovish imudover lach boy shishim neged the klipo min hakeora." How come the Ramah requires that we need shishim keneged the klipo if it's dover lach? In other words, if you actually ended up using a bedover otep, something hot. Whereas the Ramah was mekel. There are shitas later on that he was mekel when it comes to liquid. Liquid being used where a klipa needed to be taken and was not taken. So the klipa is there, swimming around. But there appears to be a differentiation between when a klipa is required, whether the klipa is required because ademeke lebola, in other words, it's a situation where the klipa is not really identifiable there. It's not sitting there as a kli that is asur. It's just being extracted through the process of tata gavar, where we say that you can be lenient, that it's nivlal, and it's diluted, it's lost. We're not so makpid on that. As opposed to where the klipa is there, identifiable, where it's sitting there, where the kli is actually asur, and the kli is actually roteach, and therefore emitting its isser. So it's a little bit hard to see the difference, because the isser is there either way, but in the case of tata ba gavar, we say that the isser is somewhat lost into the liquid by being extracted, and whereas the keli being hot, it's always there, always the midah isser at all times. Anyway, so the Shach wanted to say, well, maybe the Ramah, the reason why he says here it's asur by la, because it's talking about a kara rotachas, that it must be hot. Otherwise, why would he be machmir, to require the klipa or shishim keneged the klipa? So that was one possibility that the Shach said that maybe he was talking about. Or the other possibility is that it doesn't have to be here that it's a kara lotachas. It could be that he was machmir because of the shita saraiva that says that a kara that was salted remains always hot. There's always some heat even after you finish the melicha. So maybe here he wanted to be machmir in hilchas melicha for that reason too. In other words, he's choshish for the shita saravot that does require the shish neged the klipa plus the shita saraiva. Then we went on to explain the Ramah regarding his scenario that mutar lachzor velimloach babasar la'achar shenikvu, that after you took the vessel that was non-perforated, you made holes in it, you can go ahead and use it again to resalt future meat, now that it's perforated. Plus, he adds, you can also use that vessel to place meat that has already been salted, rinsed, and now you basically want to preserve it. So you're salting it again, but you're putting it in the kli that absorbed a klipa of iser. So the Ramah doesn't say why you can do it; it just says you can do it. So everybody jumps on him. To explain yourself. It's the Rambam is many times, accused of, where did you take it from? What's the source of it? Explain. It's good to explain. But he basically feels that it's not necessary to explain. It's a very simple idea, and it has to do with the klal that we learned. We mentioned several times that ein melicha lekelim, that even though we've said all along that melicha does have some koach to be mavliya, the isser in a keli. In other words, the isser, whether it's something treif, right? It's being salted. No more heat. We're not talking about heat right now. We're talking about not kovish either. We're talking about melicha. And melicha is not exactly equivalent like the other ones, but in some ways it's pretty powerful. It can absorb its tam, its blias into the kli, but it does not have the koch to be maflit. Whereas cooking can do both, right? You can put in the tam into the kli, you can extract out tam from the kli. Kovush also has a certain koach. But melicha can only put in, it cannot extract out. So that's important to know, because if it's something that's going to be in there temporarily, I say temporarily because if something is in there 24 hours, a piece of meat is in there 24 hours, that was the taz in the shach. That was the next taz in the shach, where there's a question amongst the poskim, if it did sit there 24 hours in this keli with this, okay, it's being preserved, right? And and it's sitting in this new sear, ultimately it's kosher tzir, but still this kli is an asur kli, so kavush does have a koach to take out the tam that's there. Melicha doesn't. That would be a question. That was a question. So it doesn't appear from the Ramah that the Ramah is concerned if that sitting in the kli was less than 24 hours. Why? Because of the famous klal en melicha lekelim. Okay. So therefore, doesn't appear to be a concern, even though they discuss it. Doesn't appear the Ramah has any problems with that because of the klal en melicha lekelim. But if it wasn't 24 hours, we have the taz and we have the shach that kovush is kemevushel, and kovush does take out tam from the keli. Just that the shach had this idea that perhaps, hey, why worry about it? After 24 hours, it's anyway nois and tam nefgam, right? So by the time, we had a question when we were learning either Basar v'cholov Taaruvot is what happens first? What came first, the chicken or the egg? So is the kovush taking place first, or the nois and tam nefgam is taking place? So obviously kovush happens in a sense sometimes before the nois and tam nefgam, according to the way we learned. And that may be a problem. But at least the Shach made that suggestion that perhaps this wouldn't be an issue here. But others say, well, it wouldn't help you so much because when you have tzir, it's perhaps machli l'shvach. There are certain spices and certain things that we know that they actually transform the tam or improve or enhance the tam to the extent that it doesn't become pogum by being me'es le'es, by having been around for 24 hours or more. So like a double charif. So the Taz explained that, as far as ein melicha lekelim, we know that extracting is not a problem. And kovush b'tzir would not make any difference because kovush b'tzir is a problem only lehavliya. To be mavliya, you could have a problem with tzir. You may not even need 24 hours. You can need just a little bit amount of time to be mavliya into keli. But to take out, we still rely on the klal. So that's really the basis of the Ramah on that you're allowed to go ahead and resalt meat after you made holes. There shouldn't be a problem. Or, okay, but that is not exactly so. Because we have in Siman, if you remember in Kuf Hey in Taaruvot, you're right. Technically, because of the same klal. So in Siman Kuf Hey, Gvinois shenasu betfusei ovdei chachavim, cheese that were made in the forms of goyish kelim, in barrels that were used for their wine. The same thing. So cheese is salty and it's being formed, it's being prepared. Afa pine shenimlechu betoichem mutorim, the halacha says, for the same reason. Right?
But don't we have in general use a non?
Right, that's what we're going to talk about next. That's what we're going to talk about next. That's where, when I told you last week that I wasn't sure why no one really elaborated more on that, I noticed that I should have learned the shach all the way till the end. I think he adds a little bit more to it, so I'm going to go back to that in a minute now. But because you brought it up, it would be mutter for the same reason.
And when you say it would be, it sounds as though it's not.
Not lechatchila. Right. That's what the Ramah tells us. V'hu hadinim nimlach hete b'shar kli, not just cheeses. Nimlach, because we said ein melicha lekelim. What's happening? V'afilu einu menukov. The ein meliach keroteach kol kach lehaflit min hakli. The meliach is not like roteach so much to the extent of being able to take out from the kli. Ma shebalu b'toicha. But dafka b'di'evet. But lechatchila also. Lechatchila you can't do it. Yeah, to be we're choishes to the poskim, to the several poskim who are machmir here. Even if it's an Isur D'Oraisa. What's that? The one that I want to look at, the one that I didn't see till the end, was Shach Samach Zayin. That's correct. That's what I want to go over just a little bit before we go on to the next Seif. So that was the Ramah. The Ramah telling us that we have two applications or two situations where it would be okay, even though the Kli has become Asur K'dei Klipa, you make new holes to it, you can continue to salt. And even if you don't want to salt exactly meat, but you want to preserve meat that has already been salted and rinsed, you can do that in this Kli too, even without the holes. Because the one, of course, if you're salting to take out the blood, you need the holes. Right. But if you don't need to take out any more blood, you just want to preserve it, you don't even have to make holes. So on that, we had a little bit of a question. On that, we had a question, Several poskim asked on this Ramah that you shouldn't be somech lechatchila on the klal, ein melicha lekenim limloyach boy. Lechatchila we don't rely on it. Okay, you can go ahead and do that. We saw over there that lechatchila you shouldn't do it. And besides that, the Minchas Yaakov asked a good question. He says, we learned that you can't use a keli that was boleh isur until you do agala to it. I mean, you just can't use it, especially unless it's arai. Occasionally, in a kli cheres it says if filo arai you can in an earthen pot. So we know that's a famous halacha that okay, this is treif. Can I use it temporarily for something cold? I'm not going to cook in it, of course. Temporarily, there's no problem. Yeah, but here it's not talking about temporary. So that was a good question. So I think it was important for us to continue. The Shach has a little bit more of an elaboration on this din. And then you see if I'm able to. I don't know if he answers all those concerns, but at least it gives us a little bit more of an understanding that this din is not your typical din of Isur. I think that's what comes out of it. That Melicha is not your typical situation. There's somewhat a little bit more lenient. So let's see here. The Shach says like this. Miu koshe. Given the ein melicha lekelim lehaflit ale melicha, since there's no melicha for kelim to be maflit, so kosher can shemut l'shtabish b'shvot zoinen. Says, what's the big deal? What's the chiddush here? I can for sure use zoinen. I can use cold stuff. Well, could you use cold stuff? You should suppose. What do you mean you could use cold stuff? You're not allowed to use cold stuff for an extended period of time. Occasionally you could. But remember, what did he just say? He says, Ein melicha lekenim lehaflit, never. Well, never? Well, by kovush it could come out. Through melicha it can come out. Okay, fine. So in other words, what the Shach is saying is, so far, based on the Ramah, what we're talking about is to use the keli only for melicha purposes, over and over again. Well, that should never be a problem, and that's what the Ramah means. That if you intend to use this to salt meat, to make holes, it for sure would never be a problem. You're never going to use it for cooking. It has holes, right? So for melicha itself, it would never be a problem because there's no haflata, there's no way that anything can come out, no matter what you do to it. So that's clear. So if that's the case, wait a minute, how am I going to use cold stuff in a kli that has holes? So you see, the Shach, in a way, I understand his question. He wants to say, if there's no melicha lekenim, why shouldn't I be able to use it with cold? But wait a minute, to use it with cold, you can't just use a kli that's asur for cold extensively. Once in a while, yes. And here the Ramah is saying, you can go ahead and use it, but when did he say you could use it? You could use it for resalting. So, okay, but anyway, let's go on. Let's assume we understand the Shach and we agree with him that the question is a valid question because he says, since there's no palita lekelim, why not use it for tzornim? Because you will never have that concern. In other words, what he's saying is he's extending the idea of no concern, just like you have no concern by Melicha's Basar, you should not have the concern by tzornim. Because why do we say you can't use it for tzornim? Why? Why do we say, don't use it for tzornim extensively because you may eventually use it for hot stuff? But here, if you can never have a situation that it will be asur, you could never have a situation where it would be asur, but you would have if you cooked in this pot. Right? You in other words, and on the one hand, you do have the exact same chashash. So what does it help me that he says, Ein plita lekelim? Ein plita melicha is not maflit. Melicha is not maflit, but cooking in it will be maflit. So again, we're back to square one. Why does he say kosher keshemuta lishtamish botzoinin? But anyway, his question was like this. The Shach was bothered that the Ramah put this comment, Min kein amai kosav arav hai dino achar yesh oimim shekosav ha-mechaber. The yesh oimim that the mechaber writes is yafilu betzoinin also lishtamish bo belo hadocho. Okay, so the Shach's question is only really on a regular keli, obviously that has no holes. Okay, on that regular keli that has no hole, the mechaber says yesh oimim shafilu betzoinin also lishtamish bo belo hadocho. Lishtamish bo belo hadocho Yore Deah mashin lishtamish boy. Says, on that he asks, well, wait a minute. Kiven de Melicha lekin lehavli de Melicha kosher keshemuta lishtamish botzoinen and v'im kein amai kosav arav haydin achar yeshur mishe kosav ha-mechaber. That you can use it to, for just about anything that you want to use it. In other words, to preserve it and for tzoinen, if there's no plita from kelim. V'nira de shani basar. Why did he put it here? The shani meat is different, like we've learned later on in Tzaddik Aleph. The basar chai v'chayotze bo de urche behadocha. Basar chai, raw meat, usually we rinse it before we cook it. We always rinse it under the water. The mutar laniach bekli shel iso v'lo amrinun kiven de bo hadocha tilmu mishtale ve'oche v'lo hadocha. Kiven de urche behadocha. Since meat you rinse anyway, we're not concerned you may forget and eat it without the hadocha that would be required if you put such a meat in such a pot. Tzoinen. Since meat will be rinsed anyway. Aval shar dvorim afilo tzoinim also lishtamish bekar zu shemalchu b'basar kiven de bo hadocha. Achakach im lishtamish b'chashin dilma yishkach v'nadeh. So in the end he agrees that you can't use it for tzoinen because there's at least a minimal requirement of hadocha, and that because you may forget to do hadocha, we won't let you do it. So ultimately he says what's different about this case is that we're talking about meat, and meat that you usually, raw meat that you usually rinse, therefore there's no concern that you may forget because you're going to do it anyway. You're going to for sure rinse it out. And that's what he's talking about over here. So I think that's what he means, that here, specifically, we're talking about raw meat, or this situation, where it's not an issue. You're not going to forget, you're going to do it anyway. So now let's see. The Minchas Yaakov having asked, also lishtamish b'kli shebola isur. Okay, but this is different. Why is this different? Because here, there's no concern. There is a concern elsewhere, b'kli shebola isur. Here, ultimately, there is no concern. So I think, without getting too much deeper into it, that in this particular situation, the Ramah says we could be lenient because if that we're talking about raw meat that you're going to rinse anyway, you're not going to forget. You're not going to forget. What is the concern? Because Me'ikar Adin, he says that he should be mutter altogether because implit and the Melicha is not maflit at all. So why do we answer it? We only answer it because you may forget. Here, however, you don't have that problem. So I think the comment of the Shach helps us understand a little bit that the Ramah is not, so difficult as it appears. He does seem to imply that here we're dealing with a situation where it would be an exception to preserve the meat in a kli. Well, nothing will happen right now anyway. In the meantime. Right, it's not going to be maflit, but don't tell me that. You can for sure put something tzoinen in there. No, you can't just put anything tzoinen there. Why could you put this one in there? Well, this one is different. This one you're gonna rinse out. Or in the case of the meat that you're preserving, you may not be rinsing it now, but we're not concerned with the little bit of time that it's sitting in there. That's what he means. The only time we would be concerned if it was more than 24 hours. So therefore, either in the first scenario, reusing it after you've made holes, there's no problem because there's no melicha lekelim. And in the second scenario too, it's not an issue. I think if from the Shach and Taz it's mashma that less than 24 hours the Ramah at least is not choishesh for any tzir that accumulates. The tzir itself will not draw out the blias. And as far as the davar tzoinen obviously would be also like anywhere else, except if it was raw meat. In this case, that wouldn't be a problem. That's why he says yesh oimrim. Shafilu betzoinen also lishtamish bo belo hadacha. And who does he say it in the name of? There used to be two b'shem yesh oimrim. But others would say that since you may not forget here, it wouldn't be a problem. Okay. Sif Yud Zayin. אבל אם הוא מנוקב מותר לאכול באפילו רותח ויש אויסרים ברותח. If the vessel is perforated, you can even put something hot in there. ויש אויסרים ברותח, and some say it's also ברותח. The Ramah says, ויש לזור לכתחילו בדיעבד מותר. So לכתחילו you shouldn't put anything hot into this kli that's used for salting meat that has holes. It has holes. And some say it's fine. So what's going on here? The machlokes has to do with the sugya, the Gemara, that says apparently clearly, that a ke'ara, that you salted meat, also lechol barateach. Don't use that kli that has holes, right? Apparently, we don't know. Well, I added that has holes. But you salted a piece of meat in that pot. Don't put a hot piece of meat in. Don't use it for hot stuff. So the Rashba, the Ran, learned from that Gemara, we're talking about regular Melicha case. It's a regular Melicha, which means what? It means it's a regular pot with holes. And the Ravid, I think, and the Ramban say the same thing. So they hold, apparently, from that sugi, the way they learned it, that even a kli that has holes where you did proper Melicha and the blood went out, still has become asr, and you can't put a davar reteach in it. The Rosh holds no. You can go ahead. Since you can go ahead and reuse this kli for a second time for melicha, can't you do that? If it has holes, you can use it 10 times for melicha, right? Why can you? Because we hold dam mishrik shorik. The blood always slips, it's slippery, and it flows out. So you can put something hot in there too, there's no blood in there. But the Gemara said you can't. The Gemara's case is talking about a kli that is not menukav. That's the way the Rosh learns. And that's the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Because he says, "Aval im hu menukav mutar lechol ba'afilu roteach v'yesh oisrin." Right? So he holds like the Rosh, that the Gemara's case is talking about that it's not menukav. That's what the Gemara says, don't put something hot in there. The Ramah says, "Lechatchila osra b'di'evad is mutar." So the question is, but wait a minute. According to the Rashba, who holds that this is a regular kli with holes, and still you can't put something hot in there, why can you salt again in this spot? You can't put something hot, but to salt you can. So he holds, the Rashba says clearly, to salt, again, I don't have a problem with it, because when I salt a second piece of meat, I did the toret polit. In other words, lemifladam, I did the toret lemifladam lo bola. As the second piece of meat is busy emitting, exuding its blood, it cannot absorb anything. But just for me to put something hot in there, that's different. So you see, the Rashba makes a very good chiluk. He says, yes, I'm telling you, I'll let you salt more meat in this vessel that has holes, but I won't let you put a hot piece of meat in there. Well, what's the difference? Why could you salt again? If the kli has become usher, go use another kli. No. When I'm salting, that new piece of meat, any future piece of meat that's being salted is emitting, exuding its blood, and as it is exuding the blood, in that stage of expelling the blood, it cannot absorb any isur.
Even worried about that when the melicha does not pull out at all, even care.
Good question. A melicha lekelim, to be, to extract, right?
So then why do we care? Melicha doesn't pull it out.
Unless you hold that that there always is you're right, a very good question. I have to check it out. If I have a chance, I'll look it in the Rashba again. I don't know if he says that, if he gets into that, if he touches on that. But that's a good question, Ilan. What do you say?
Well, I actually have the same question on that. It does, and he's following that opinion. Maybe he's addressing that opinion.
Well, we can always rely on the opinion that says, Melicha Lekein is only a b'di'evet, not a lechatchila. Remember, right? So here, if that's the case, lechatchila means you wouldn't do it if that was a problem. I mean, if that was a concern, which it is. I mean, but it's not b'di'evet.
We're relying on it only to be b'di'evet the second time.
Right.
The pot again. He says you're allowed to use it again. So he's got to hold it.
No. So that's why he says, the Rashba says, the reason why I let you reuse the pot, even though it can be a concern, maybe, is only because I did the Toret Basar lemiflat dam lo bola. It's not bolea anything. But you're right, and that's what the Ramah says. Basically, Ramah says once you make holes, you can go ahead and use it. We hold that there's no problem. But the Rashba, in explaining at least the Gemara, he says, even the Gemara says don't put a hot piece of meat in there, you can still reuse it for salting it. Why would we be able to reuse it for salting it? In other words, I guess since it has become asur, because of lechatchila maybe. But the Ramah says lechatchila you can reuse it, because he's, I guess, soymech, that lemaisa, there's no concern. In other words, when it comes to resalt, that's what we were saying before. That was the shaila before, really. That was one of the shaila of the poskim, and we're not soymech on ein melicha lekein lechatchila. So it's a valid question all over, even by the Ramah. Just that we said that perhaps with melicha itself, ein melicha lekein, not soymech is what we had in Taaruvot, that perhaps to put something in an iser keli, you don't want to put salted cheese in a form, lechatchila. But over here, to resalt it, why will be able to do lechatchila? Why can't we rely on ein melicha lekein lechatchila? Because of what the Rashi says. You see, that's basically the answer. That's the answer, I think.
We could never use the same. So whether it's the
No. But it just came to me. That's the reason. L'chara. What we definitely saw in Taaruvos. Lechatchila, we don't do that. We don't put something kosher in a treif pot if it's salty. Even lechatchila, lechatchila, don't do it. But it's fine. All right? For whatever reason, lechatchila, no. Here, lechatchila, it's okay. Why? So the Rashi already gave us the answer, which apparently the Ramah is using. What's the problem? I did the mitrid lemiflat lo bola. He would never have a problem. In other words, here you never have to have any concerns. Even if you hold that Melicha extracts something, it won't go into the meat. That is actually the reason. That's the explanation. He wouldn't hold that way in Melicha. That's what we began to explain.
Would he hold that way in the forms?
No, in Taaruvos he would tell us, ein Melicha lekein. Nonetheless, lechatchila, don't do it. Here, I'll let you do it lechatchila. Why? Because let's assume the worst. It does bring out the drop. Let's assume the worst. It won't go into the meat.
If we did.
Right.
Pot.
That's correct. That's correct.
The cost on this, for the housewife or the butcher or the
No, you would have to do a gullah.
That's phenomenal.
No, you would have to do a gullah. You're not going to do melicha in the earthenware, keli. You would hopefully do it in the metal or whatever. So you would have to do a gullah.
Before
You have to boil it. Yeah.
You could slant.
Plank. Oh yeah, in a slant. Yeah.
And you couldn't read. You
Not-
would never be able to read if you held Melicha.
Right. Well, it all depends. In the case of a slant, maybe it would be better than a kli with holes.
But if we say that,
Maybe it would, because the whole thing is falling. The whole thing is dripping away. Whereas a kli with holes, maybe there's parts of it where the salt goes all over the place. There's only holes. It's different. It could be there would be a difference between a plank and a kli. That's what I'm saying. But anyway, so that's what it comes down to really. We don't say melicha lekein lechatchila. In other words, we avoid it. But here you can reuse the pot, and why? Because even if the worst case scenario, a little bit does come out, as the Rajva points out, I did the mita the miflatam lo bola. So Sif Yud Zayin is pretty simple, straightforward. That some achloikis, whether you can put something hot in there or not. Ramah says the chatchila don't do it, but the evid it's mutter. Why is it b'di'evet mutter? Because it has holes, Therefore, we assume that everything went out, and we don't hold. I mean, b'di'evet we are soymech on the rush, that the Gemara says can't put something hot only in something that was not menukav. But had it been menuka, the Gemara didn't say that. So we would be samech on those poskim that say it's okay. B'di'eved, according to the Ramah. All right, Sif Yud Ches. So we spoke already about the keli. Now what happens to the meat? Basar shanim lach bekli she'eino menukav. The meat that was salted in a kli that is not menukav. B'shoha bo kashir she'itnu mayim al ha'esh. Okay, so we're salting a piece of meat in a pot, in a vessel that has no holes. She took the meat, the balabasta, some balabasta, salted it and put it into a pot. Then she realized, oh, where did I put it? Oh no, it's sitting in a pot. It has no holes. Right? That's what happened here. And it was sitting there, and it sat there the amount of time that it takes to put water on the fire for it to boil. If it sat there that long, whatever is sitting in the tzir that accumulated, also you can't eat it at all. Even if you roast it. The portion that is out of the tzir, the only thing that is asur on that piece of meat is a kedei klipa. In other words, in the rest that's above. Remove that klipa, and the rest you can salt. The rest you can take care of. Even if it has fats, it's a fat piece of meat, we're not going to say it goes beyond the klipa. The dam is not mefapea all the way up and down. All right, that's the mechaber. That was only the mechaber. The Ramah says no. And this is a very interesting Ramah because this Ramah applies even behefsed meruba, according to the Pri Megadim. V'yesh oisrim kol hachaticha afilu ma shechutz latzir. The whole thing is gone. You can't even do tzli to this one. Tur mordechi b'shem ma'ara. V'afilu lo nimlach rak me'at kedei shemorchim latzir. So he says two things. Not only, even if I don't care that it didn't say it long enough, even if it wasn't even salted just a little bit. It only sat a little bit. But you already see the tzir in the kli. That's the mineg. You don't make any changes. Some say that even as far as we should be strict by this one. I think the Chaf HaChaim maybe. Don't change this. There's one good news. If you had a lot of pieces of meat sitting on top, only the bottom one is asur. The one that's touching the bottom of the kli. All those chatichas sitting on top of it, they're mutar be'ochin. That's the meaning. Okay, so now let's try to begin to understand piece by piece what is going on here. So here we know, we see in the Rishonim that the meat that was salted in such a kli is also from melicha and tzli. That we know. The Rishonim write that there's no machlokes on that. It becomes asur. The melicha, the tzir, basically destroyed it. There's nothing you can do about it. Where is there machlokes? The differences in opinion, the various shitas apply to that piece of the meat that is not sitting in the tzir. That is where you have at least one of the major machlokes, as we saw here in the Ramah. Okay, that which is sitting in the tzir, okay, I'll throw it out. I'll cut it away, throw it out. Can't do tzli. Can't do anything with it. But what about the top portion? So the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch, which we saw, they hold that only that portion that's in the tzir becomes asur. Now, the Rosh also makes the following distinction. The Rosh goes ahead and makes a distinction that if that piece of meat that's sitting in the tzir sat there long enough, like the amount of time it takes to put meat on the fire and boil it, then it becomes asur. What if it was just there for 3 minutes, which is not, as we will soon see, it's not the required amount of time? The Rosh says it would be asur kedei klipa. Even though we hold that which is sitting in the tzir becomes asur, that's only if it sat there the required amount of time. So that's a very important distinction that the Rosh makes. It's important to know how much time it was sitting in the tzir.
Why are we assuming that all of the
well, remember, it's a piece of meat that's being salted. So what's coming out is all kinds of liquids that are there, including blood. So it's not all blood, but part of it is blood. Yeah. So you're right. It's not all blood, but some of it is blood, and we don't know how much blood came out. Rabbeinu Peretz and the Ramah hold that the whole piece of meat is usur. Why? Why? What happened here? This is not kovush. It's not mevushal. They hold there with the opinion that the salt that's here, the whole process causes the dam to be poirish. And remember we learned about dam sheporash? That's the concern here? That's the whole concern here. Yeah. It's dam, the tzir, the melach, this whole process has the ability to be mafresh the dam imokom lemokom. And therefore what? Well, therefore after that you can't use melicha to extract it. Why? Because the tzir, together with the kli, the pressure on the kli, cause it not to be able to come out anymore. In other words, somehow the blood has moved and the blood has frozen in its spot, somehow. In other words, right now it's in such a position that the salting will not help it. And apparently, according to from what we learned, the tzli will not help it either.
Why would it be any worse, which is soaking in that? It would be the liver.
Sure.
And soup.
Yeah, the nature of liver is different. The nature of liver is all blood.
Right,
So
here's a piece of meat sitting in a little bit of it. Why wouldn't sleep work? I can understand why you couldn't do
The Rabbi Akiva Eiger has a little bit of a question on that. He does. Yeah, you're right. Very good question. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger touches on that, and he actually remains with the tzorich iyun. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the dynamics here is such that from the way Rabbeinu Peretz learns in the Ramah, that the whole piece, even that which is outside the tzir, so that's the chiddush over here. Even that which is outside, it was strong enough, something in the melech and the tzir was strong enough to affect the whole piece. Okay. We don't really know why and how, but apparently that's what it does to it. Okay. So the Shach has a good question over here. The Shach asks on the Shulchan Aruch that the portion that's sitting in the tzir, I realize I cannot do anything to it, I cannot even do tzli. Then why, the Shach says, in Sif Tesvov, when we learned about Basar shenichbash, Basar kovush in water, isleis, without melicha, over there you told me you can do tzli. This is similar to your question, but on a different angle, and on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Mechaber. Mechaber, you told me you can do tzli, right? Remember Sif Tesvov? Unless you have shishim. So tzli would work on basar shenichbash. Shenishra b'mayim. It sat soaking in 24 hours. Kavush. This is worse. So the Shach wants to understand, why can't you be molech this kind of a meat? And also not do tzli. Why over there by kavush it's okay? What does the Shach say to that? He says apparently melicha is different than kavush. He says what melicha does to the meat, kavush doesn't do. Melicha somehow, he says, takes the blood, moves it around, and somehow freezes it. If it's sitting in a pot that has no holes, so somehow the blood that is moving around, and now it's moving around because salt is drawing it out, right? It does have that effect. Salt is powerful. It will begin to draw it out, but it has nowhere to go. So that process of moving through salt and not being able to come out makes it get stuck in such a way that melicha and tzli cannot help it anymore afterwards. Apparently melicha has ability to take out naturally. Once you've done something, you've figured it. I mean, you've moved this blood around through bishul or through melicha. You can't get it out. With kavush, he says, apparently, it doesn't do the same. Kavush, maybe melicha won't help, but tzli can still take it out. So they were aware of certain things. Yeah.
Emitting.
Right.
It should not be absorbing. If it's pulling out, if
Okay.
the melicha is taken out,
Right.
and that's still going on
Right.
while it's sitting in its job of drawing out all the dye.
Right.
So it's emitting with the.
No, it's not reabsorbing.
Right.
No.
So then reabsorbing from it should not be a problem.
Right. We're not concerned about the reabsorption here. We're concerned about the dam inside that moved, that can no longer be taken out later.
Okay.
That's what we're concerned here. Yeah. And somehow the melicha moves it around in such a way that later it becomes difficult to take it out, even sleep. Whereas through kavush, he says, apparently, I mean, doesn't do that. Melicha, he says, is more powerful than kavush in that respect, that the dam that is porish inside is going to get stuck in such a way that I cannot get it out later on. That was a question of the Shach. So the base mayor here, there's a Pirush Chidusha base mayor here, very interesting. So he asked, but wait a minute, I have a problem here with this ideas. On the one hand, he says, I see that kavush me'es le'es is not mashpia on the basar, right? I can do tzli to it. But kavush is strong enough to take out tam from the kli. We've seen that, we've learned that, right? Kavush can take out, after 24 hours, it's powerful enough to take out the blias from the kli. But somehow kavush is not strong enough, right? To move the blood around in such a way that I can do still tzli to it. As opposed to sitting in tzir, melicha with tzir. Look at this, melicha with tzir. What does melicha and tzir do? Melicha and tzir is mavliya. In other words, moves around, causes trouble to this piece of meat, moves around the blood and it freezes it on the spot. But has no koach to take out a belief from the kli. Did you follow me?
Sure.
Kavush has the koach to take out after 24 hours what's in the kli, but doesn't have a koach to ruin this piece of meat. I can still do tzli to it. As opposed to tzir, look what the tzir does to the meat. On the other hand, it can't take out the tam. It's powerful enough to destroy this meat.
I mean the salt, right?
Yeah, the tzir, the salt. Look at what it does to the meat. But it cannot take out 10, 15, 20, half an hour, 3 hours, the belief from the kli. This melech and tzir is powerful stuff. Kavush can do that after 24 hours. Tzir cannot do that. Well, tzir can cause problems. You see the question of the base mayor?
Absolutely, yes, but I don't think
Right. I don't.
point.
Huh?
I don't think he has much of a point.
Right. Exactly. It's not.
Why should two things not have two different things?
Exactly. Yeah. So he was a little bit bothered by that, but if you look further into it, and Ilan says he's 100% right. It's not such a big question.
Is more powerful than the other. You would expect it on a Kalvachoma that it should everything.
That's what he's asking. That's what he's asking.
Yeah,
but
he's abstracting from the particular nature of the thing.
Exactly, and you can't do that. And you really shouldn't say that because the two are different. It's apples and oranges.
If one guy's a really powerful mathematician and the other guy's really powerful at lifting weights, then both of them are powerful, depending on the situation, might be able to outperform the other.
That's right. Yeah. So therefore, obviously, what's the answer? Most likely, Basar is different than a Kli. That in Basar, the tzir can do something to it. But that tzir cannot do anything to the Kli. It's a mathematician. Right? The tzir can't do anything to the Kli. It apparently can do something to the Basar. Kavush, however, me'es le'es, doesn't have charifus. It's not hot, spices. It's a process called kavush. It doesn't, therefore, destroy the meat entirely. It's not chorif. But it does have the ability to slowly but surely, after 24 hours, to extract through the process called kavush the blias in the kli. But tzir, even though it's chorif, the chorif does not work on the kli in 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Obviously, if it would be kavush tzir, it's the same thing like water kavush. See what I mean? So each one has a different, like you were saying, a different koyach. So that's why it's not such a big question. But I thought I should present it anyway, so you should see how the svaras are different by tzir and by kavush, but they definitely are different because basar and klilim are different. That's all. Yeah.
He's worried about the Yiddish tzir.
Yeah.
Worried about that tzir from the...
No. For a very short amount of time, it appears that the Taz and Shach were not concerned about it. Obviously, if it sat there for a long time, it would still be the problem. If that kli was usher, so regardless of the liquid that's there, if even water, it would take out. Yeah, sure. Okay, now, so Rabbi Kiva Eger asked the question. If you look at the language of the Mechaber, that's the language. How much does it have to be sitting in the tzir? The amount of time that it takes water to be put on the fire and to begin to boil.
Right.
Oh, really?
Said that before.
Oh, if I look at Taaruvot, where that language is brought and mentioned, Im shoho kedei sheitenenu al haor v'yartiach.
That's exactly the same thing.
No, it's not. The Rabbi Elyahu says, wait a minute, here it says, V'shoh kedei sheyitnu mayim al ha'esh v'yatchilu l'artiach. Here it doesn't say that. The language is different.
How different?
Here is saying for the amount it takes for water, to be put on the fire to be boiled. He doesn't say that in Taaruvot.
What is this? What is it?
Im shol kedei sheiteneno, whatever that is, sir, whatever you're putting, al haor v'yartiach, and it will boil.
It's funny, in the Taaruvot, I thought we said that it was water we were talking about.
Yeah, because obviously
Oh, so we already understood.
we already understood that. Yeah. So Rabbi Elyahu is saying, but why is the language here different? So the Meforshim say basically, like you were trying to say, that it's really the same thing. Yad Yehuda says here that it's the same. Don't think it's a different shiur. You may think it's a different shiur because the language is different. No, it's the same shiur. Okay, so what is the shiur? How much is that time for it to sit, to boil, for water to be boiled? How much is that time? So we discussed it a little bit in Hilchos Taaruvos. The Architruva talks about it. He says, first of all, when you're figuring it out, you have to use a kli that's Beinoni, a Beinoni amount of water, and a fire that is Beinoni.
Yes.
Everything is Beinoni.
I was going to say
Sure.
exactly three factors that make a difference.
Yeah, very important.
I'm curious how you determine Beinoni.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what is
Anyway, so he brings down in the name of some poskim, I forget who, that shear of Beinoni is Kehilu Chmil, 18 minutes.
Things work out that way.
Yeah. But Yad Yehuda says, wait a minute, you have to be machmir in a lot less than that. He says 18 minutes is a long time for, water can boil a lot less than that. So the Yad Yehuda apparently does not agree with that. He says it's probably a lot less than that. You have to be machmir. In Kuf Hey, in Taaruvos, the Darkei Tshuva says there that there are shitas that say we need to be machmir after 6. And that's what we learned in Taaruvos. If you remember Taaruvos, we learned the shear of 6 minutes. I don't know if everybody goes by this shear, because there are some machronim who hold that we're not bekiyim even. We don't even know exactly what the shear is, so you have to always be machmer in the lesser amount. Because even though it tells us the shear takes the amount of water to boil. But 6 minutes, in 6 minutes, something Beinoni can't possibly boil. Yeah. So, anyway, if it was definitely beyond, if it's more than that, then you have a problem. If it's only 2-3 minutes, you definitely can most likely get away with it.
Especially since we're not really saying anything happens, we're just a measure that we apply.
Right.
So we're borrowing it.
Yeah.
So it's a hypothetical.
Right.
It's not really claiming that anything is.
Yeah. But it could make a big difference. Halacha.
So therefore, we can't rely on it being maybe a different amount.
Status?
No,
what we're doing here is we're saying we're comparing one to the other. We're saying since we're calling this, so we'll look at how long does it take it something to, and then we'll apply the same reasoning, the same amount of time over here by the kavush.
By the kavush, yeah.
But no one is claiming that the
by
kavush actually within
you mean by nimlach?
By nimlach. No one is claiming it, but it's here. No one is claiming that that actually, if you measure it, this is what's going to happen. It's just because it's a borrowed halacha.
Yes.
Because
Right.
Kiyyur,
right.
So we're making that comparison. So we're transferring all of the halacha that apply by Rabbinical.
Once, as we said before, once you see an accumulation of tzir at the bottom, it's already a problem. So if it's sitting there for over 6 minutes, it would be a concern. Now the mechaber is okay about the portion that is outside of the tzir. That could save a lot of meat. The problem is that with the Ramah, it would be an issue. Anyway, so let's continue with the mechaber. So the mechaber says that it's nesa kedei klipa, the basar that's me'al tzir. Why? Why is the portion above the tzir kedei klipa? So the Shach says pashut that the dam is mefapeya kedei klipa. That's all he says. Why klipa? It's mefapeya kedei. The Vilna Gaon says something very interesting. The Gross says, you know what? The kedei klipa is really the place where you cut it. It's not mefapeya. You just have to cut it. You have to cut away that piece. So because you can't be exact, where do I cut it exactly? So they said, be marchika kedei klipa. So the Gaon doesn't learn here that the dam is mefapea kedei klipa. He just says it's really makom machatach. It's where you're going to cut it. And since you can't be exactly precise, so you move it up a little bit kedei klipa. That's all he is. You can't be mitzamsim. Chazanish, and I saw other achronim hold that it's pretty much like the Shach says, dam is mefapea kedei klipa. But either way, you cut away a klipa. All right, what about the Basar shelo shah shir kvisha? Where the Ramah seemed to be machmir here. The Basar was not sitting a shir kvisha. The Tur and the Rosh and the Tur hold that it's not also al kedei klipa. If it actually was there for 4 or 5 minutes, it wasn't there for the shir kvisha. In other words, that it should, like the shir that Mechaber says it would become asur. Would it still be asur? Yes, but only a kedei klipa, nothing more than that. Now there's a shach in Siman Ayin, which we'll eventually get to, that explains that in the case where you had basar that was completely nimlach, salted, and hudach, and it fell into tzir, since we're not bokim in kochosh, between kochosh l'shomen, everything becomes aser even before the shir kavisha. In other words, as though the dam is the one that's shomen. So, obviously, I mean that tells us that the one idea behind why we're being machmir in less of amount of time, plus perhaps in the portion that's out of the tzir, is because of that lack of bekiyas between kochosh and shomen. Whereas here, the Rosh and the Tur would hold, even if it's shomen, it only would go kedei klipa if it was not the shear of kvisha. Because they hold dam is kochosh. The meat, they don't, it's not a problem. Even if the meat would be shomen, since the dam is kochosh, it's not an issue. But over there, he's talking about what's in the tzir, obviously, not what's outside the tzir. Over there, he just says that since we're not bekiyim, it's also right away, even before the shir kvisha, which seems to imply that he does treat the dam as being something shomen. Anyway, on this, Rabbi Kiva Eger asked the question that even though we say a piece of meat may be also kedei klipa, why shouldn't we say that melicha should help the kedei klipa? Since it's not really kavush, why doesn't melicha help? Remember, we said melicha doesn't help when something is kavush, only tzli perhaps. Why are you saying that something should be also kedei klipa? Perhaps melicha will help it. So he doesn't really answer. That's his question. So that's what you were asking before. Why don't we say, even though it went in, so what if it went in? Why shouldn't melicha help it at some point? What happens to it that melicha cannot help it? So by kavush we said it doesn't work, but tzli does. But here, it's not kavush. It's only asur kedei klipa. It didn't really become asur to begin with. So the kedei klipa, the melicha should not help the kedei klipa. Why not? It's not kavush. So that's a good question. Apparently, with tzir we're machmir. All right, just to finish up over here, the Pri Megadim, as we said earlier, says that according to this Ramah, that we answer everything that is above the tzir, that is even behefse meruban and sudas mitzvah. In other words, even in those kinds of situations where we're lenient elsewhere, here we're not. What the Ramah, however, says that even if it was not nimlach halat, it was just nimlach a little bit, he took that from the Isser Vehet and the Mordechai, and there's 2 reasons for that. Just salted it a little bit. Just a little bit? Why should that be a problem? I guess you can say, if it sat there for a while, okay, with the shear, let's say it was the real shear, then you could say the top portion also becomes also, there's shittas about that. But if you didn't really salt it, you didn't do a complete salt job, why would that be a problem? So there's 2 tamim that I saw. One is a pashup hesber because we're not bucky between what is called the melicha mu'etes and the real melicha. Unless maybe if you did just a sprinkling. But what if you did one side? What if you did a third? What if you did salt all over but not every square inch? So we're not really bekeen what does melicha mu'etes mean? To say, well, if you just did 1 square inch, it's okay. Melicha mu'etes, when we learn melicha mu'etes, it means that you just put a little bit of salt. Yeah, but what is a little bit? So some say because we're not bekeen, that's what we're machmir. Others hold that, and that's the second explanation, that the reality is with salt, this kind of salt, is that even a little bit of salt already begins to extract blood. You will begin to see it. That's a fact. So since a little bit of salt does extract some blood, guess what? Kol shekain, that it may cause dam to be nekam mimokom lemokom. You hear it, Ilan? Yeah. If the salt can draw out blood, a little bit of it, salt, then who's to say that it will not draw out inside the blood of the meat, mimokom lemokom? So we're talking about a kli no menukav here, right? So a little bit of salt may accomplish the same thing. It may get the blood moving, and then it's stuck. It didn't have a place to go out. That blood that's stuck cannot come out. So even if it's a little bit of salt, it could be an issue. Okay, the only question that really remained of this Ramah that I thought perhaps was important for us to cover is it appears to be, I'm almost sure it was the Pri Megadim who said that this Ramah would answers even behefsed meruba. Just as ein leshanois v'chein noagin, right? So the Chavas Das has a question over here that in Tzadik Aleph, right, in Taaruvot, not Taaruvot, in Tzadik Aleph in Basar b'Cholov. Over there, we learned that in Mokom Hefsed Meruba, Melicha Mu'etes is not called Siddur Teach. There was a Siman that was talking about salting things kosher with non-kosher foods together, if you recall, in Basar b'Cholov. So over there was an issue. Obviously, Basar b'Cholov and Treifes and Bechlal, it's a problem. Even though you're not cooking them, you're salting them in close proximity, it could be an issue. So we said that in the Hefsed Meruba, Melicha Mu'etes is not a problem. It's not called Roteach in a Hefsed Meruba situation. We rely on that. So if that's the case, why don't we say that Melicha here should help for dam that was nekam mimokom lemokom? If perhaps by Melicha Mu'etes the blood did not perhaps freeze. That's his question. In a Hefsed Meruba situation, I think. Because he says over there, he doesn't say Hefsed Meruba, but he's saying, if over there we don't call it Meliach Kiroiteach in a Hefsed Meruba situation, he says, okay, so let's apply it over here. If it's not a lot of salt, then maybe Meliach is not like Roteach, it's just a Chumrah, then why not say that salt, that I should be able to salt it, and that the blood really did not move around to the extent that it's frozen. You follow the question? In other words, if over there I can say Behefsed Meruba the Melicha is not like Roteach, then maybe here I would be able to get it out through regular Melicha. In other words, it did not freeze up like in an ordinary real Melicha. Perhaps here we should be lenient if it was a little bit of salt. So he says something very interesting. He says when you put a little bit of salt, it's very possible that the basar will not become Roteach. The meat will not be hot, but the dam is hot. He says a little bit of salt gets blood moving around. It gets the blood to not really boil, but gets the blood to be roteach, gets the blood to work up. It perhaps does not make behefsed meruba in Tzadik Aleph. It perhaps does not make the basar roteach so that it could be mavliya, or absorb or whatever, have a problem with that which is adjacent to it. The basar is not roteach with a little bit of salt behefsed meruba, but the little bit of salt perhaps does cause the dam and sear to work them up and to become roteach, and that is why it's a problem here. The dam that moves. However, the other poskim seem to be saying that dam is only roteach once it's come out of the piece of meat, not while it's inside. That's like the Yad Yehuda said. Only dam and sear sheniflutu are called roteach, not while they're in the meat. That is why they hold that the main reason why the Ramah is really makpid over here is, as far as the piece that's outside the meat, and the other chumras too, perhaps, is because we're not bekim between kochosh and shaman. And to some extent, that klal would not bekim between kochosh and shaman is affecting this a great deal, because then it's mefapeya. Once you say shaman is, then it moves out, it moves around. Just that with the blood, it's not really a problem whether the blood moves. In other words, I don't know if it's so much of a problem of shaman causing the blood to move around, or what the Chavas Das says that it starts moving. But either way, according to Chavas Das, according to everybody else in the Ramah at least, it is definitely a concern. For whatever reason, it's a concern, even a little bit of salt. Whereas to the Mechaber doesn't seem to be choishesh. He doesn't say if it was less, it would still be a problem. No, he says clearly, it would have to, only in that case would we be machmer, and only in that which is sitting in the tzir. So, obviously, even though the Ramah says we don't make any exceptions, this is the halacha, at least we know, we have the Mechaber, the Rosh, that hold that anything above the at least above the tzir. You may be makbel with that which is sitting in the tzir even after a few minutes. Okay, but save the rest of the meat. So, okay, depending on how you hold, you may still be able to save the meat. But according to the Ramah, it would be a big problem, especially if you know for sure that you salted it properly and it's at the right amount of time. It would be a big issue to contend with. But you finished up with some good news. That's only the piece of meat that's at the bottom. Many times you have a lot of meat being salted. Don't worry about the top. So that's good news, because if a lot of meat, chickens or whatever it is, are sitting on top of each other, the one in this case, the vessel that's not perforated, is sitting in sear, even though we take the whole chicken, the whole piece of meat, throw it out, even that's only that. Everything else above it would be perfectly okay. You wouldn't have to worry about it. You would be able to continue salting it, and you would be, do whatever you want with it. That would not affect them. Okay.
But Chavir would not take it?
Yeah, nothing. There would be no need whatsoever. So that's good to know too. I mean, obviously, only that which is in the tzir is a problem. And even that is not so partial, but we're machmir according to the Ramah. According to the Mechaber, you don't have to worry about above the meat. But according to anyone, according to all the Shitas, everything else is definitely not a problem. Okay, we'll stop here.